Hi everyone, I'm Tracy Miles and this is the third video in our 4-part series. I am going to talk about emotional parts today. What that actually means is that the central nervous system is made up of parts of us that are defensive in their nature. Their role in the system is to defend us against danger, threat, perception of threat. And these parts of us will become activated if we perceive that something or someone is a threat to us, even when it's not a threat. So perception plays out in this process. Some people will have some of their parts become activated and outside of that window of tolerance if they, let's say they have to sell their house, and that activates a freeze or a flight or a fight response. The perception of threat will activate that. However, it's not actually dangerous to sell your house. It's not dangerous to talk to your boss. It's not dangerous to leave a relationship. It's not dangerous to engage one of your loved ones in a conflict. It's not dangerous to write a report. Yet parts of our central nervous system will behave like it is. So in this series, we are presenting you with tools that will help you to navigate in your mind and in your body when these parts of us become engaged in the system. So one of the ways that I help people to understand this is if we look at, let's just look at my body, right? I have a hand, I have a knee, I have a nose. You get the idea, right? It's easy when we looked at our bodies to know that we're made up of parts, because these parts of me make up the whole of my body. It's the same with our central nervous system. All of the parts create the whole. However, what's a little problematic is the language that we use in relationship to these parts of us. You see, I would never walk around and say, I'm so knee today, or I'm so hand, or I'm so nose. That's not how I talk about the parts of my body, but we do use this language in relationship to our emotions. We will say, I am angry, I am sad. So that becomes problematic in the system because you are basically telling the system that you are the whole totality of that emotion. But that's not true, because we can have opposing feelings. And so what we do is we begin to help you to use language and unblend from the emotions that you might be having. Like, a part of me feels angry. A part of me feels sad. A part of me is lonely, versus the whole totality of me is that emotion. So let's present the emotional parts model. Okay, now I'm going to present you with what's called the emotional parts model, and I'm going to introduce you to a woman who I worked with. Her name was Lucy. She came to me when she was 32 years old, and she was mandated by the courts due to a road rage incident where Lucy jumped out of her car and took a baseball bat to somebody's windshield. She ended up in the courts, mandated for anger management, and ended up coming to see me. When I met Lucy, she was very bristly, very angry, and it took us a long time to build a relationship where Lucy felt safe enough to start to talk to me about her life. So the model that I'm going to present to you right now originated by a woman named Janina Fisher, and she wrote a book called Healing the Fragmented Parts of Self in Trauma Survivors. And I used this model to help Lucy understand some of her behaviors and some of her reactions in the world. And of course, I presented her with the window of tolerance first, then the wisdom model, and then we talked about this model. So the way that this works is when you're born, you are born into what I like to call flow. There is a children do not hold on to experiences. The experiences will flow through children. We teach them how to hold on to experiences. So if I'm walking along and I'm a little kid and I lose my, I'm eating my ice cream and it falls on the ground, of course I'm going to lose my mind, scream my head off, and then my girlfriend's going to yell my name and I'm going to skip over to my girlfriend. I'm going to completely forget about that ice cream cone. Some children, not all children. So we call that pre-interruption. There's just no holding on. There's a flow and children have the ability to let go. Then what happens is we experiences interruptions within our system and within our lives. And so in the world of trauma, we have what's called little t trauma and big T trauma. Big T and trauma is on a continuum. Big T trauma is like horrendous things that happen that most of us don't even want to think about that happen to human beings, but they happen. War, attacks, rape, beatings, those kinds of things. And then we come along the continuum of emotional abuse, mental abuse, power abuse, environmental experiences that occur. Loss of a child is a big T trauma. Maybe loss of a parent is can be a trauma depending on how that loss occurred. Then I fell off my bike and nobody noticed, right? That can be and I never got back on a bike and nobody noticed that. Or I put on my bathing suit and my uncle looked at me really weird and I got creepy feelings in my body. And, so like it's all on a continuum, okay? So I call those things interruptions, okay? So you can have big interruptions in the system and you can have little interruptions in the system. But those interruptions create a process for us as human beings. So I'm going to tell you a story about Lucy, and Lucy has given me permission to talk to you about her story. So when Lucy was 9 years old, her parents went out dancing for the evening. Lucy remembers being on her mom's bed and her mom is putting lipstick on and there's excitement in the house, there's music playing, and Lucy's favorite babysitter is going to be coming to the house and they're going to play Monopoly and Lucy's going to drink Coca-Cola and eat potato chips and popcorn, and she's really excited. Lucy enjoys her evening and she goes to bed. I don't remember if I said Lucy's 9 years old. So Lucy wakes up in the middle of the night. Now Lucy's bedroom is here and her parents' bedroom is right beside her bedroom. Lucy wakes up to screaming in her home. The very first thing that Lucy does is she sits up in her bed and she begins to scan the room. Who can I attach to? What's going on, right? So her central nervous system is beginning to kick in and that attach is starting to become activated. Lucy then gets out of her bed and starts to pace around her room, and she is beginning to hear and recognize that this is her parents and they're fighting. So Lucy's pacing at the end of her bed and she can hear her father saying, calling her mother, you whore, like all these nasty names. And her mother is trying to explain that they were just dancing and nothing happened. So these are the words that Lucy remembers, and she is now pacing. So she's going into a flight response and feeling very scared. Then Lucy hears her father say, "That's it, I'm going to kill you." He leaves the bedroom. Lucy hears the door open. She hears her father go into the kitchen. She hears the utensil drawer jiggling. She hears the utensils moving. She imagines that her father has taken a knife out of the drawer, and he goes back into the bedroom and the door slams. Lucy then stands at her door and begins to scream at the top of her lungs. Her older brother Joe comes running down the stairs and bursts into her parents' bedroom. Lucy is now standing at the door, and she is in a freeze response. She remembers the door. She can describe the door handle in detail. In fact, it was one of those old glass doorknobs that she described. And she remembers hearing Joe and her dad, like there's a kerfuffle in the room. She's hearing furniture, and she's imagining that Joe and her father are wrestling. She hears Joe say to her father, "If you hurt my mother, I will kill you." Then Lucy remembers, she's standing at the door, and she remembers hearing Joe stomp up the stairs, and everything goes silent. And then Lucy passes out on the floor, and that is submit in her system. So if you remember the window of tolerance in the first video, Lucy has gone through all of those central nervous system responses, and now she has passed out on the floor. The next morning, Lucy wakes up, and she has this rush of anxiety that comes to her body, and she gets up, and she can hear her mother in the kitchen. And so she gets dressed, and she goes out into the kitchen. And I'm going to, we call this a block. And this is what Lucy's mother taught her that morning, is that we just go on with life. Because what happened for Lucy that morning is her mother behaved. Her mother said, "Good morning, Lucy. Sit down. I'm making pancakes. How many would you like?" Lucy remembers feeling very anxious and confused because Joe is at the other end of the table and his head is down and he makes no eye contact. No one says anything about what happened. Lucy's mother behaves like nothing happened. And Lucy said she never spoke about it ever again until she was in therapy with me and she went to talk to her brother Joe. You see, Lucy's mother basically sent her the message that we don't talk about these things. And so all of this went underground for Lucy. All of her feelings, all of her experiences of that night went underground. And Lucy went to school, she brushed her teeth, she had her breakfast, and then the next day she did the same thing over and over and over again until that became history for her. But something really interesting happened for Lucy. About 9 months after this incident, Lucy's on the playground and a boy is picking on another girl. And Lucy walks over to him and she punches him. And now the school calls her parents because Lucy's gotten herself in trouble. And of course her parents then, they discipline Lucy for what she's done. Of course, Lucy shouldn't be punching young boys in the face. But you see, that night, what happened for Lucy is this is the part of her that actually worked, and it made that incident stop. It rescued her mother. And so Lucy then, in her little brain, created a pathway. And Lucy's primary part in the world was fight. And that's how Lucy showed up in my office, was that this was her most active part. Now, we have all of these parts, and Lucy learned that, in fact, Lucy was very cut off from her vulnerability, which is our attached part. And these parts have emotional, so this is vulnerability. Flight in our emotional system is fear. Fight is anger. Freeze is anxiety. And submit is shame. Now, again, this is our sympathetic nervous system. So our body will dump adrenaline, cortisol, and epinephrine when we are in a sympathetic response. And then we will switch over when we go into fawn or submission. We switch over to serotonin, melatonin, and oxytocin. So for Lucy, she had a lot of adrenaline in her body all the time. And so we had to work to help Lucy to allow some of these other parts of her to also have a voice and to speak up. See, all of our parts have what are called adaptive and maladaptive qualities. So attach, actually, what is adaptive about this part of us is that it allows us to connect to other people. It allows us to couple. It allows us to fall in love. It wants that social connection. That's the part of us that needs that. Flight. Now, what's maladaptive about attach is that it will look to other. This part of me, if it's very active within me, will look to others to help me when I'm in a vulnerable state. It's always looking externally for support when I'm in a maladaptive process. So then next is flight. Flight is all addictions. All addictions are flight within the system. And of course, that can be very maladaptive if we are always wanting to escape and we don't stay put and we don't feel our feelings and we're always escaping them. But what's very adaptive about flight is creativity, escape. It's also adaptive to escape. Like if things are really stressful, it's good to get away and go on vacation. And a lot like runners sometimes, right, can be in flight. They're run, go, 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 right? That can also be adaptive, but it can become maladaptive if that's all you're doing is running around, right? Fight. What is adaptive about fight within the system is it knows how to set boundaries with other people. That part of you, when someone crosses over your boundary, that part will actually come up and attempt to push that away, right? That's adaptive, but it will also, if it's maladaptive, like for Lucy, it will annihilate you. Like it will annihilate the environment. It will get itself into a whole lot of trouble because it is designed to kill off whatever is a threat. Freeze, what's very adaptive about freeze, if that's one of your primary responses, is that this part of you really doesn't get itself in a whole lot of trouble because it's not going to speak up. But what's very adaptive about freeze is that it has the ability to pause everything. It has the ability to assess everything that's going on in a room because it's really watching everything, right? So very adaptive if you're sitting in a business meeting and you are upset with something that's being said. If you're in freeze, you're not going to speak out and get yourself in any trouble. So that's very effective in an adaptive way. Now, submit, what is maladaptive about submit is it will shut the system down and numb you. And it can take you into a depressive state. It can put you into submission when maybe fight wants to push back on a boundary. Submit, if that's your primary part, won't let you do that because it's just going to shut you down. It also, what's adaptive about that is sometimes we just need to go to bed for a day. We just have to shut things down and relax on the couch and stop the go, 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 go all the time, okay? So That's what's adaptive and maladaptive about these parts of our emotional system. Now, this part of us, Janina actually calls this part wisdom. I have a different take on that. I believe that this is actually denial. And everyone knows that denial is a very strong mechanism for all human beings. We have the capacity to deny something that's actually happening. But this part is the part of you that's just going to pull up your socks and go, just keep going, right? Doesn't feel a whole lot, isn't really, that's all that task oriented stuff. Let's just go, 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 go. So that part can become problematic. And this part is very adaptive in terms of, like, if I'm experiencing a lot of my feelings and I'm at work, it's not appropriate for me to have all these feelings come up, right? So this part is very functional in helping me to just keep going with life. However, if it's maladaptive, it doesn't let me actually feel things and move forward and heal things that need to come up. So that is a and of course we have much more detail on this model when we work with you in session, and this is just really introductory so you can get a sense of how this actually works. Every human has all of these parts, and so what we do is we introduce you to them through what's called the emotional parts model. Thanks.